very happy to be here and to moderate this seminar today with you. The topic Leadership of the Future points to our challenges of today. But first, before starting my presentation, I would like to thank everyone who contributed to this seminar in a larger sense on the topic of the leadership, especially the European Task Force, which was involved in the thematic work, but of course all the contributions that we have received by email from our members, and a special thanks to the officers and my colleagues from the Secretariat. So we live in a world with more and more and faster changes, where we could maybe almost say that the change has become the norm, and where technological advances are very quick today. We have new lifestyles and also geopolitical conditions that maybe provide a historical phase of human development. As managerial organizations, we know that these changes need both adaptation and innovation. So the creation of new frameworks of legal and labor-related nature could provide a solution to our challenges that we are facing today, the economic, social and environmental challenges. And managers are essential for structuring and giving meaning to these changes today. They are important facilitators of a sustainable and inclusive growth by increasing organizational performance, and this for 4 reasons. First, they increase international competitiveness by increasing organizational capability at managerial level. Second, they are typically the decision makers when it comes to knowledge diffusion. And third, they are pivotal in how change is managed. And fourth, they are instrumental in creating an organizational ethos of learning for all employees. Now, after having spoken about the role of managers, I would like to come to the different level of challenges that wait and lay ahead of them. The first challenge is are the challenges at macro level, if you want so like the demographic change or the digitalization. Paolo Falco, who is here with us, he's a labor market economist at OECD, will present these challenges and their implications for the world of work, and of course also the implications that it may have for leadership. The second challenge relates to the question of how we can provide the leadership skills that we need to give orientation and to be a source of value, and this throughout life. Tomas Krusimagi, who is here with us, he's the school head of the English School in Tallinn and president of the Estonian School Heads. He will give us insights from the Estonian education system, which now counts among the most successful in the world, because Estonia has shown that it is possible to achieve remarkable results within a context of different linguistic and cultural backgrounds with Russian and Estonian speakers, post-communist heritage, and as well an education system that managed to reduce socioeconomic inequalities. In fact, Estonia had the second smallest gap in performance between the richest and the poorest students in PISA 2012. Learning to develop leadership skills also continues during the professional life. We can see that the leadership industry, the leadership development industry, is really very big and continues to grow, with estimations ranging from 130 to 360 billion US dollars spent globally on leadership development every year. Leadership and leadership development face both structural and conceptual challenges. Structural, as I said, these macro trends that are awaiting us, but also traditional structures, innovation barriers, or linguistic insularities. And conceptual challenges, due to often an explicit understanding of what leadership actually is about and can do. So our research program on leadership tries to shed a bit of light on this question of what leadership can mean today, and includes our survey that we have mentioned yesterday briefly, a series of follow-up interviews, the case study, and of course our seminar of today. And the third challenge, after having identified which skills and competences are needed to work towards this more inclusive and sustainable growth, the central questions of how we can put these changes in practice remains. In other words, how can we increase organizational performance of our organizations. This question of organizational practices is one of the pillars of this leadership research, and will be dealt with in the second practical block of our seminar by exemplifying these practices with topics on mental health with Monsieur Jean-Philippe, and with Magnus and Muller, I don't see them, from Lederna, there he is, who will speak about integration with an example of Managers Express. Now, before presenting the study results, I will just briefly explain how under leadership and leaders were understood in this research, that research design that preceded the study. So, broadly speaking, no, I didn't slide. There it is. There was broadly speaking, we can say there was a shift between traditional leaders' approaches that suggest that leaders have rather constant and limited traits, competences, or behaviors that they use to assign, delegate, or otherwise influence their fellowship. And these approaches have proved problematic in explaining the context, in explaining the external influence on leaders in social, cultural, or economic contexts, as well as the dynamics of the organizations and the difference between the leaders and the others. Leadership approaches have made helpful contributions for taking account of the situations, the networks, or the way organizations also behave in their environment. These approaches stress that context is important, and that leadership and organizational development are also part of the same process. So therefore, the notion of leadership in the study accounts to the role of the leaders as a connector or a node, the social dynamics of in the organization, and the role of learning processes of the individuals, but also of the organization as a whole. So if learning to see these interconnections is important, the question now is how we can grasp how this learning manifests. And there we can turn to the concept of competence. But the problem of competence, the notion of competence, is the difficulty to distinguish doing something and being able to do something. So the fact of fulfilling a task within the notion of competence is actually the proof of competence. So competence is supposed to explain performance, but is in fact exemplified by the performance itself. So it's a tautological understanding. And it makes it difficult to apply it to real-life challenge, and for practical reasons also to measure it within a study. So therefore we chose to understand competence as a tacit concept that facilitates skills, behaviors, and knowledge. And used 4 categories: emotional, social, action-oriented, and cognitive competence. So on the other side, the advantage of focusing on skills rather than on traits, for example, is that they will learn to learning outputs, irrespective of the routes of acquisition, and not on learning inputs. It's therefore open to more people, and of course includes these corresponding learning processes. Furthermore, they're an application of knowledge that can also comprise behavior as improved behavior. Now I will present, I'm sure you're curious about the results of our survey. So we had in total, it was a very big success. We never had as many participants. So I can really congratulate every one of us to these results. We had in total 488 participants. That is more than in any other edition of the European Managers panel. With this country distribution, as you can see here, a lot of participants from Italy, but also from France, Germany, Greece, and Belgium, with a majority of male participants. With regards to the level of position, we had a quite balanced respondents with around 53% middle managers, 30% senior managers, and 21% at executive and board level. And with regards to the sector, we also had a very distributed image of the participants that were quite present in all industries. but above all in the chemical, pharmaceutical industry, in energy, but also a lot in the public service, which is also very interesting. With regards to the skills, this table shows the highest. You will also find it in the documents you have received. The highest and lowest skills in the proficiency assessment of the survey. And here we can see that a sense of responsibility and ethics were ranked very high in all three categories. So in proficiency, we also asked the value. So which value do you give to these skills? Should they be important? And the importance, the development in the future. And we can see that these three were quite similar often, but not always. Here, for example, leadership, leading by example, had a relatively high proficiency, one of the highest, but relatively speaking, the importance was less likely to, the people think it will increase less than others in importance. But the difference is not very high, and still people think that it will gain in importance. On the other hand, we have dealing with ambiguity and uncertainty and challenging all assumptions that ranked less high than the average. Normally the respondents had for the proficiency levels means of between 3 and 4, between good and very good as a result. Right, now we had two main questions. The first question relates to skills, the influence of a proficiency level on individual performance. Of course, it's a self-assessment. It's also not a representative survey. This is important to mention, but the direction confirms the academic literature on this topic, and it clearly shows that an increase of the proficiency level of the skills increases individual performance. Here you can see it. We have a moderate influence between both, and I think it's a good result. But more stunningly, we have a second main question, and this is the question of the how. How are organizational practices really put in practice? So what is this how in compared to the what? So when we asked what of the activities, it's about, for example, having sports activities, having cultural activities, etc., having an innovation manager as well. This is the what of the activities, and the practices is more a cycle of reflection, assessment, collaboration, a way of seizing these practices, and it corresponds to what is academic literature has spoken about this, although there's not a lot of empirical evidence, and this is why steer in this kind of a black box to analyze. And indeed, it shows that these organizational practices increase organizational performance, and not only a little bit, but relatively strongly. And this is I was quite surprised, and I think it's a very good result, and it shows the importance of leaders, how important it is that leaders are able to see how am I organizing these practices in an organization, how am I conceiving it, how am I collaborating with others, and this requires these skills, these leadership skills that I was mentioning. Right, so for our seminar and in general, I think there are some questions that we can ask ourselves, and I hope that our seminar can contribute to answering these questions. And the first one relates to the policy framework. So how can we create or support an organizational development with supporting these organizational practices? Then, which role do leaders play as this network or node, as was in the study, in concrete context? And how can organizations adapt to today's challenges and create new modes for development?